Well, welcome to today's Executive Insight Briefing. My name is Brian O'Ruben, and today we are looking at a very interesting case, the case of Taiwan and the story of their resilience. Now, what if your organization was an island, isolated, under threat, but thriving? First of all, how is that even possible for your organization to be an island and is isolated and is under threat? Is it possible to thrive under such conditions? Here is a nation of 23 million people sitting in the shadow of a giant, facing constant existential threats, and yet it has become a global powerhouse. Taiwan's TSMC produces over 90% of the world's most advanced chips. The silicon heart of our phones, cars, and AI. At the same time, Taiwan has transformed from martial law to one of Asia's most vibrant democracies. I mean, how is that even possible? Well, that is the essence of our briefing today. Welcome once again. If you haven't already got the case, it would be a very good idea for you to visit the Brian Ruben Digital Vault, which you find at brianoruben.com/BDRV. If you go there, you'll be able to find the case brief, Taiwan, Strategic Clarity in the Shadow of Uncertainty. You know, things in the world doesn't get easier. Successful people get tougher. Successful companies get tougher because things don't get easier in the world. Taiwan has demonstrated to everybody that science, diplomatic conditions does not necessarily translate to success or failure. It's a shining example of what is possible when your organization, you are under threat, you are isolated. It is possible to thrive. So we see what Taiwan has done. How have they achieved this? Well, it is through what I call the 3 pillars of Taiwan's success stories. There are 3 pillars of Taiwan's success, which is what I would like to share with you today. The first one is technological excellence. See, and that means they mastered, it is their mastering of semiconductors. The second one is democratic consolidation. And that is about building trust and participation. And the third pillar is adaptive governance, which is about innovating governance for agility. Now, as the case brief says, Taiwan is not merely reacting to threats. It is actively shaping its future. And that's quite interesting. In a world that is characterized by different kinds of threats, geopolitical instability, shifting alliances, tech disruption, a world of uncertainty. How is it still possible to succeed? Is it still possible to thrive? How do you respond to threat? Well, Taiwan has shown us that you don't just respond to threats, because Taiwan doesn't merely react to threats. Taiwan actively shapes its future, and that is quite interesting. So today, we'll explore how Taiwan has turned vulnerability into agility. And what I call the Taiwan proposition: you don't need power to be indispensable. You don't need power to be indispensable. That is what Taiwan has shown to every one of us, that we don't need power to be indispensable. We need strategic thinking. So today we're going to be exploring this. And if you have ever seen the map, you will see how insignificant Taiwan, an island nation, looks when you compare to China, a massive, big country that is constantly threatening Taiwan. So the question is, what can your organization learn from that? What can you learn from Chinese resilience? Let's start this way. Taiwan's story began in 1949 with Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang. So when they fled, when they fled China after the Civil War, they arrived on Taiwan and imposed martial law. This martial law lasted for 38 years. It was a 38 years of authoritarian rule. But here's the twist. Even in that authoritarian era, they laid foundations for transformation. Land reforms, US aid, investments in education, fueled what became the economic miracle. Factories, exports, technology institutes all sprouted. But here is something interesting, because then came 1987, and this 1987 was a turning point. Martial law was lifted, and in the same year, TSMC was founded. 1 year gave birth to both democracy and semiconductors, which brought about political openness and theological excellence, working hand in hand. By 1996, Taiwan held its first direct presidential elections. And by the 2000s, it had forged a unique identity, not Chinese in exile, but Taiwanese in distinction. So you see, when they fled to the island, see, after the war, and of course the martial law was imposed, by 1996, a lot of things were changing already. They held their first presidential elections. And by the 2000s, a new identity unfolded. It wasn't no longer a Chinese people in exile. It was Taiwanese with distinction. And when the COVID-19 struck, Taiwan's response was world-class. It was rapid, transparent, coordinated. And as the case brief noted, this was resilience, reinvention, and strategic foresight in action. And if you don't already have the case brief, it's important that you get it. Go to the Reinvention Digital Vault, and you will find the case on Taiwan, and you can download it. You'll also see several other cases that might interest you. So think of your organization, your own organizations, where you are still operating in 1949, rigid, defensive, and where you can make a 1987 move. Remember, it was in 1987 that the Taiwanese turning point came. That was when the martial law was lifted. So imagine that you are in your own 1987, and you're going to make your own move. And that will be a pivot into innovation and openness that changes the game for you. I hope you are following. Now, let's look at the governance architecture of Taiwan. And there what we'll find here is clarity over centralization. Now, Taiwan governs with coherence, not centralization. At the top, there is a balance. President handles national security and foreign policy, while the legislative yuan ensures accountability. Now, supposing this is a technocratic civil service that carries institutional memory, a bureaucracy that isn't just paralyzed by politics. Add to that, find the public-private partnerships, the ITRI, the Healthcare Science Park, These were incubators that brought about industries like semiconductors. And then you find the digital leap initiatives like Taiwan, which allows citizens to deliberate policy online. Audrey Tang, the digital minister, embodies this ethos of open participatory governance. And this is where you find in Taiwan's, genius. It blends the Confucian statecraft, American democracy type, and local pragmatism. And as the brief says, Taiwan governs through coherence, responsiveness, and strategic intent. Now, think about your own team. Think about your own company. Is it a centralized pyramid, brittle under stress, or is it like Taiwan's governance, a web of checks, partnerships, and adaptive capacity? You see, so your bureaucratic muscle can be stress tested, but it still performs. You see, this is the model that has worked for Taiwan. And it's a model that any company can apply. And especially in these days of very serious uncertainty, we live in a world of ongoing uncertainty, where you really can't tell what policies will change tomorrow, what alliances will shift the next day, all right? What attack will take place, the next day, and that could change the geopolitical equation just overnight. So operating in such high stakes environment requires more than good plans. It requires more than having good intentions. It requires having the approach, the strategic approach that enabled Taiwan succeed, irrespective of all the challenges and the threats that it's constantly facing. Now let's talk about the strategic narrative and national identity of Taiwan. See, perhaps Taiwan's greatest innovation isn't cheap necessarily. It's not chips. It could be a story. For decades, Taiwan they were stuck in a narrative. Chinese in exile. But over time, it rewrote itself as a Taiwanese with distinction, democratic, innovative, a frontline defender of freedom. Now, this wasn't just words. It was performative, high turnout elections, and flourishing creative industries, and of course, semiconductors. So in Taiwan, narrative is national security. So think about your own company and think about how you can use narrative. Are you currently using narrative? And are you using narrative strategically? You see, do you understand the power of narrative? Narrative shapes perception, narrative shapes partnership, narrative shapes almost everything today. So for Taiwan, narrative is national security. Its vulnerability caught between China and global indifference, interesting, became its irrelevance. So Taiwan branded itself as the indispensable democracy. So the question is, what about your own organization? Are you telling a story of victimhood or a story of vitality? Is your brand identity assaulted or proven through action? How do you want the world to perceive you? As an organization that is victimized, organization that is stuck, organization that is resilient, organization that has clarity. And even as a person, it is possible that you are just looking at this from your own personal perspective and thinking about what you can learn from Taiwan. So think about it. What narrative have you framed about yourself? Are you projecting yourself as a victim of where you were born, victim of the country where you live in, victim of the system in your world, victim of political situation, or is it a story of vitality? Is your identity asserted, or are you proving it through action? Okay, so that's something you want to take a note and you want to think about, because in the world we live, no one truly has time to form an alliance with a weak organization, with a victimized organization. So do yourself a favor. Don't tell a story of victimization. Nobody will really partner with you based on that. People will only come partner with you if you can project strength and become a strategic asset that they can leverage for their own interests. That's just how the world works. Now, what can we learn from all of this? First of all, let's distill the Taiwan's journey into 7 lessons. The first one is you've got to build identity through action, not assertion. All right? So, and Taiwan shows this. It doesn't have to shout. See, people are going to want to relate with you, not because you said, not because you want it, not because you are demanding that, but because you're demonstrating something of value. And I kind of overemphasize the importance of this, especially in our world today. Demonstrating identity through action instead of assertion is a difference between branding and credibility. See, anyone can assert, I'm innovative. Anyone can say, I'm ethical. Anyone can say, I'm a leader. Their identity, whether personal or organizational or national, is only real when it's embodied in consistent action. So think about it this way. Assertion is a press release. Assertion is the press release you put out there. But action is a track record. Identity is what people conclude when they line up your action over time. For example, a company doesn't become customer-centric by declaring itself to be customer-centric or by inserting that in their mission. It becomes customer-centric by solving problems quickly, treating clients with respect, and creating products that impact lives easier. A leader isn't visionary just because that leader says, I am this. No, you earn that tag by taking decisions others hesitate to take. And those decisions prove to be prescient. A nation isn't resilient by slogans. It shows resilience when its citizens keep innovating and thriving despite external shocks. So building identity through action requires consistency. It requires repeated actions that reinforce the same story. It requires visibility. Others must be able to see, feel, or benefit from the action. And finally, it requires endurance. See, action sustained over time, not one-off gestures. See, you can't be called, you can't be considered a patient person because you demonstrated patience once. No, it has to be sustained over time, not just one-off gestures. So as the old line goes, don't tell me who you are, show me. Now, this is what Taiwan has demonstrated for us. And this is the reason why they have been able to succeed, irrespective of the challenges right, that they face, challenges that will bend several other nations. There are even countries without sufficient, without, any challenge close to what Taiwan faces. Yet, irrespective of all that Taiwan has faced, Taiwan continues to push the boundaries of possibilities, shining through, making a difference, asserting its power in a world as ours today. That's something incredible. That's something you must learn for your organization and for your country. Now, the other thing that Taiwan has done is innovating from the edges. And that's when marginalization becomes an advantage. How can marginalization become an advantage? Think about it. Here is how it plays out. It is about, it's about center, being at the center versus being at the edges, right? Now, those at the center, dominant institutions, mainstream voices are often, they often trapped by their own success. They defend the status quo because they have the most to lose if they don't. But you see, the edge on the other hand, those are the edge on the other hand, is where necessity enforces creativity. So when you lead from the edge, see, you don't have the luxury of resources, power, or visibility. So you invent. See the power of leading from the edge. This is when marginalization becomes an advantage. Secondly, you look at how constraints builds creativity. Marginalized groups often lack access to traditional tools. So they hack, improvise, and reimagine. That's why many of the most disruptive innovations, from mobile money in Kenya to hip hop in Bronx, were born in spaces of exclusion. The third one is outsider advantage. And this is what happens when being outside the mainstream allows freedom from orthodoxies. And what does that mean? You don't need permission to experiment because you are never invited to the rule-making table in the first place. So you don't need any permission. You can try new things, you can try new ideas, you can try new partnerships. And that's what Taiwan has done. And that is what you've got to do. The other one is resilience as capability. You see, marginalized communities often endure repeated shocks, economic, social, political. Over time, that endurance builds resilience. So you'll be amazed at what such people can tolerate, what they can manage. Something that will drive people in other places crazy. You see, that ability to, those repeated shocks gives them, over time, gives them the ability to build endurance, to build resilience. And the resilience then becomes a form of strategic advantage when others face their first real tests. So here is a message. The margin is not weakness. And this is interesting. You could be operating or running your business or living from one corner of the world where you feel you are marginalized. The mainstream, the opportunities available for those at the mainstream, institutions, they're not just accessible and available to you. Seems like you're almost forgotten by the system, maybe by the government. That's not a disadvantage, my friend. It's about how you view it, your perspective. So the margin is not a weakness. It is a launch pad. The only problem you have is if you are at the margin and you keep insisting that you are given the advantage of those at the mainstream. And this is a message to African leaders, a message I have taken to different parts of Africa at different times, but I continue to talk about. That Africa's solutions, for example, will have to come from Africa and from Africans. They will not come from the IMF. They will not come from the World Bank. They will not come from the WHO. No, they won't come. They will have to be born out of Africa's ability to